Well, hey, friend, welcome back to the Jennifer Allwood Show. I'm excited to be here with you today. I'm going to do something I've never done before on the podcast. Now, I know sometimes I feel like I say stuff like that, but really, I've never done this before. So, just so you kind of know how our podcast works, I have a whole team of women that are amazing, work for me. I have our podcast editor, Zeke, my son Easton, and Zeke is Nell's son. Nell's my director of ops. Easton puts the podcast on YouTube. A lot of times I am feeding my team ideas that I have for podcast episodes. They figure out though, like where they go on the calendar, what we need to get out when, based on, are we opening up the mastermind or are opening up our software again, or, things like that. So anyhow, it's a group effort. And so I try to let them be the boss of me. If you listen to the podcast episode that I just did about like how my team insulates me, like I want them to have autonomy. I want them to be able to tell me what to do. And I want to let them do their job. When I hired, some of my original hires, a VA, project manager, I said to them, like, I just need somebody to be the boss of me. So with that being said, I don't often try to come in and kind of mess up the plan once it's already in place. So we have a podcast plan for summer, and this is the episode we're going to release. We've got this one with Brandon Turner. We've got this one with Shalene Johnson, and we've got this one with Jen and Jason talking about nervous systems and socks. We've got this one talking about negative. And so I try not to mess that up. However, yesterday I was talking with Kelly here at Team Allwood. Hello, Kelly. And I told Kelly, I think that an idea would be that I would read chapter 8 out of my book, Fear is Not the Boss of You, for the podcast. And I'm like, I have no idea how that just even came out of my mouth. I don't know where that idea came from. My book came out 4 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know. I don't know where that idea come from. And so Kelly said, well, if you feel that pretty strongly, you probably really need to lean into that. She knows that I hear from heaven. She knows that I hear from the Lord. She's like, maybe somebody specifically needs to hear that right now. And I'm like, sometimes you just need people to give us that reminder. And so with that being said, I'm going to be obedient to what I feel like was the prompting of the Holy Spirit for me to read chapter 8 of my book, Fear is Not the Boss of You, here on the podcast. And even when I've had this podcast for 6 years, I had the book for 4. I don't think I've ever read parts of the book for my podcast. Also, it feels a little unnerving that I'm going to sit here. It's like story time. I am going to have to wear my glasses, and hopefully I won't trip over my words. But I can tell you kind of the gist of chapter 8. Chapter 8 seems to be one in my book, Fear is Not the Boss of You, that business owners in particular, but a lot of people really like, because none of us, I don't think, get out of this life without a loss of relationship of some sort that was important to us along the way. So in my case, in chapter 8, I talk about the loss of a friendship that was very dear to me, but also how hung up on that I was, and how that was affecting every area of our life that eventually, I feel like my chair is too tall here on YouTube, that eventually the Lord had to get a little bit, I don't want to say stern, but I had to hear something, and I'm going to share that with you, just to kind of like snap me out of it. And I'm wondering if I'm reading chapter 8 today for possibly you or another listener who needs to snap out of something and just shift their thinking so that you can get to the next stage, the next season, the next thing that God has for you. Okay. So I'm going to read chapter 8. And if you've never gotten my entire book, Fear is Not the Boss of You, go grab it on Amazon. By the way, there's no paperback version. I don't know why Amazon has always given people a paperback version. And I've gotten just a handful over the years, people who said, I never got the paperback. I'm like, because there's never been a paperback. So there's that. Okay. So chapter 8 of Fear is Not the Boss of You. How many of you know I wrote this now, 5 years ago, but it's still relevant, baby. It is still relevant. The entire first section of the book. And by the way, the subchapter or the subtitle is How to Get Out of Your Head and Live the Life You Were Made For. But the first whole section is trying to figure out if you're stuck, overwhelmed, or scared. The whole second section of the book is, okay, so how did you get there? Like, what was it that kind of jacked you up? And here's some of the things. Chapter 4, I talk about watching other people win. Chapter 5 is about how you're hanging out with people who are stuck, and stuck people get people stuck. Chapter 6 is that you're aiming for the goal of confidence, and confidence should not be your goal. I talk about the difference between confidence and courage, because when you're waiting to feel a certain way, you will often wait a long, long time before you do the thing that God's asking you to do. Because when you're doing something for the very first time, you can't expect to be confident. Man, Kelly, will you write down? I just need to do a whole podcast episode on the content of that chapter. I don't want to read that chapter, but confidence versus courage, I need to do a whole podcast on that. And then chapter 7, I talk about like deciding you're staying stuck. It really is your fault. And then in chapter 8 is called If You Would Just Let That Go. And that's what I'm going to read today. Okay. At the beginning of every chapter in Fear's Not the Boss of You, I have a quote. And this is the only quote in the book that's from God, where I heard God, and God said to me, I have so much more for you, Jennifer, if you would just let go of that. That was God to me in my SUV. Okay, you ready for this? All right, here we go. So a few years ago, I was driving to Target, where all good things come from, but my mind was not focused on good things. It was stuck on a situation that had been causing me heartache for 3 years. I was thinking about a friend, well, a former friend. She'd been dear to me for a long, long time, but for reasons that are unimportant to this book, they really are, she needed to walk away from our friendship. I made mistakes. She made mistakes. And as two women who love Jesus, I wish we would have been able to resolve our differences better. But regardless of any of our efforts, it just didn't happen. The friendship was over. And 3 years later, I was still devastated about it. Okay, listen, it makes me like have a little lump right here in my throat. Not because I'm still pining for that friendship, but I can remember for those 3 years just thinking about the loss of this friendship so much, and it consumed me. It consumed me. And somebody's listening today that can understand that and can relate. Okay. So as an introvert who puts a high value on a few close relationships that go the long distance, I don't let a lot of people get close to me. Can the rest of you relate to that? But when I do, I tend to be in a relationship with those people for a very long, long time. When I love long and I love hard. I'm still thick as thieves with my high school BFF, Rachel, and I've been besties with my friend Laura for over 20 years, ever since I loaned her a swimsuit on our first get together, which is hilarious. And once you've shared a swimsuit, you just are kind of in life together. Hashtag sorry, not sorry. So losing this particular woman's friendship was devastating to me. And to make things super complicated, because I've always got to be extra, we were in close friend groups as families. We lived near each other. We went to church together. Our kids were friends. They went to school together. They went to church camp together. So to say things were awkward is an understatement. There was no way to avoid one another. And our friendship breakup put a lot of stress on all of our mutual friendships. Gosh, I remember just feeling like such a jerk because of that. My heartbreak over the friendship eventually turned to anger, which eventually turned to bitterness, and then turned to what I now know was torment because I just couldn't let it go. Okay, I'm going to read that again. It then turned to what I now know was torment because I just couldn't let it go. Okay. What I'm about to admit is ridiculously embarrassing, but I'm hoping someone is going to be able to relate and to be set free. And that's why I'm reading this today on YouTube, because I was so stuck. I would make an effort to do crazy things like look cute whenever I left the house, just in case I saw her. I wanted to lose a few extra pounds because when she saw me, I wanted her to not only think I looked cute, but to also think that I looked skinny, as if losing 20 pounds would make her somehow miss our friendship. And even though I would deny it, I would get upset if our mutual friends hung out with her. Those were not my best days. Nothing that I am proud of. I would imagine the conversation that we would have if she ever called and said she wanted to be friends with me again. How would I handle it? I would even imagine something terrible happening to me and me hoping that she would feel bad and she would feel sorry when she heard about it. And that would teach her, right? That would teach her to dump our friendship. It's so gross, I know. And I probably became a little bit obsessive. But when you're knee deep in bitterness and unforgiveness, you really don't think rationally. Anybody know what I'm talking about today? Anybody? All right. Can you relate? I would venture to say that if you're being honest about your own catalog of hurts, that probably there is a story or two in your life that makes my situation sound and feel familiar. And because I was stuck for 3 years in unforgiveness and bitterness, I can now sniff that out in other people a mile away. I meet so many women who are stuck in some part of their life or business because a piece of their past they just can't let go of. Maybe it was a broken relationship. Maybe it was infidelity. Maybe it was trouble in their marriage they didn't see coming. Maybe it was a conflict with a parent or a childhood wound that has not yet been healed. Maybe it was being burned by a less than honest business deal. We all have a somebody did me wrong song. And I always find it's interesting that people think they can keep their lives nice and tidy over here. And they can keep that dark or painful part of their life separate over here. They think they're able to compartmentalize their unforgiveness and their bitterness. Like this happened when I was a kid. So surely how I handle conflict with my boss or husband today has nothing to do with that. Listen, I love you enough to tell you the truth. That is not how this works. You are the same person at work as you are in your marriage, as you are in your parenting, as you are in your friendships, and as you are as a daughter or a sister. You interact in all of those relationships based on the things that you have been through. The health of every relationship you are currently in is dependent on how you have healed and how much you have healed from your past relationship wounds. If you are clinging to things that are dragging you down in one area, you will see that show up in other areas. If someone feels damaged, hurt, or used at work, they will often bring those feelings home with them. A hard day at the office for you or your spouse can often mean an uncomfortable evening at home for the entire family. And the same thing happens in reverse. If there's a mess in someone's personal life, it automatically affects their work. Hello, Britney Spears, 2007. Okay, then I go on to say, if you've been through something in your personal life that is making unforgiveness and bitterness an issue, don't think that the ramifications of those feelings are not showing up somehow and in some way in your work and your other relationships, because they will. But I didn't understand all of that at the time. I didn't realize that my fear of abandonment was causing me to get stuck in a friendship loss. It really had nothing to do with her. Honestly, it didn't. And everything to do with me. Listen, some of you right now, you need to own your own junk. Before I even finish reading the rest of this chapter, you just need to own it. You need to own the fact that there are things you're clinging to that have nothing to do with the person who wounded you and everything to do with you. All right, so there I was on my trip to Target, thinking again about that lost friendship. And God must have gotten to the point, as all good parents do, when he finally had just had enough, because I heard God speak clearly in my messy, paint-filled SUV that day. He said, Jennifer, I have so much for you, but you just won't let that go. God was practically like clapping in between each word for emphasis. And I knew right away what the Lord meant. I knew what I heard the Holy Spirit. I knew what it meant. Yes, I had said with my lips that I forgave her, but I would have dropped everything in a heartbeat had she called. In my refusal to let everything go, I had made that incident, that hurt, into almost an idol. I was stuck. And the way I knew I was stuck is because I couldn't quit thinking about it. And here was God telling me, girl, it is well past time to get over this thing. But until you do, I'm holding everything back that I have with your name on it. Ooh, who needs to hear that again? And now here was God telling me, girl, it is well past time to get over this thing. But until you do, I'm holding back everything that I have that has your name on it. That, my friend, got my attention. God zapped me out of a 3-year daze in a nanosecond. And I thank you, Jesus, because I knew that me not getting over that friendship wasn't only affecting me, but it was affecting my family and my friends as well. And I just couldn't let this keep me from God's best for me any longer. I told the Lord right there in the SUV that I was done, right then and there on the highway. And I committed to move on emotionally and mentally. And I did. From then on, every time thoughts of that friendship returned, I would stop and I would intentionally force myself to think of something else. There would be times that I would literally walk around my house repeating, I forgive her. I forgive her. I said her name. I didn't say her when I was walking around, but I actually said, I forgive her. I forgive her. I began to start praying for her, and I began to start praying that God would bless her life. I quit letting myself get reeled into conversations that pertain to her, especially when I knew that those people were literally baiting me. You guys know what I'm talking about? Like when people are trying, you know, they're trying to stir the pot. Oh, the Lord hates that. And here's what I said in parentheses in the book. Newsflash, people are trouble starters. They will remind you of your hurt just to wind you back up again. And that is the absolute truth. After 3 years, my heartbreak and torment and grief were finally over, and I wasn't about to pick that heartbreak up ever again. Now, okay, I know for some of you who are facing huge losses or betrayals, my story may not sound like a big deal. It's not like I had to let go of a relationship with my husband or a parent. Everyone loses friendships, right? And maybe they do, but the point wasn't the friend. The point was that I was letting the loss of that friend and the bitterness that grew from that loss trip me up and steal from me. I gave that entire situation permission to steal my time, permission to steal my peace, and permission to steal my attention, and to steal from my other friendships. While I was pining over something that I no longer had, that friendship, I was missing out on so much that I did have. And on that day, on my way to Target, God showed me that I was going to miss out on even a bunch more if I did not let it go. Friend, listen to me. Unforgiveness and bitterness will always keep you stuck every single time. It's like hands wrapped around your spiritual neck. It will choke the life right out of you and everything that you're setting your hand to. It's going to affect your life, your family, your relationships, and yes, even your business. And that is not God's best for you. I want you right now to think of a situation in your life that you just cannot get over, because I know you probably have one. Maybe it's a person who did you wrong, a boss who treated you terribly, a bad situation that someone put you in. And maybe, like me, it's been 3 years for you. Maybe it's been there as long as you can remember. But regardless of how long you've held on to that, now is the time to let it go. God has so much more for you if you will just let go of that. I hope that someone reading this has been set free right this second, because you do have a choice. You can move on. The decision is yours, and it really does boil down to just deciding and obeying. Let me tell you another story. Last year, God asked me to host my first ever Women in Business conference. I'll tell you about that conversation later in the book, but for now, let's say I had some doubts. So if you want to hear the rest of that story, you're going to have to go to Amazon and buy Fears on Westview, okay? I really went kicking and screaming throughout the entire thing. One of the hardest parts of conference planning I learned was trying to come up with the content for the conference. It's one thing to host the event. It's another thing to take on the responsibility of delivering a message that is valuable to more than 600 women from all over the country who are sacrificing their time and money and energy to attend my conference. I can remember that like this. I'm triggered as I'm reading. I can remember that conference. Oh, and since I am a follower of Jesus, I knew that my message would also have to line up with whatever God wanted me to talk about. So I asked the Lord what he wanted me to talk about, and God literally handed me a humdinger. For months, I thought about my talks and what would be the most beneficial to the women who were coming to the event to learn how to have a bigger and better business. I could teach them how to earn a 7-figure-a-year income. I could teach them how to get more Facebook followers. I could teach them how to set up a sexy email sequence. I could give them strategy upon strategy, but God was not having any of that. And God was making it clear to me that my conference was not to be just about business. He wanted this event to be straight up church, and I was terrified. Woo! I remember. Now, listen, I know my audience. They're mostly middle-aged women. A good portion follow me back from my painting and DIY days, and a bunch of them are creative small business owners. And yes, many of these women profess to be Christians, but I do have a ton of followers who have a different faith or no faith at all. I knew that some of those followers put up with the Jesus in me simply because they liked me, and they liked my projects, and they liked my business advice. And I love that these women, and perhaps you're even one of them, will still follow me despite our differences in faith. But when it came to the conference, how much God talk would my attendees take? Because it's different when you're face to face. I didn't know. And when God showed me that he wanted me to open up the conference with a speech on how unforgiveness and bitterness is sabotaging your business, there was weeping and gnashing of teeth from me. And I remember that too. I literally wrestled with God, like, for real, you want me to start with that? Women are here trying to figure out how they can bring their husbands home from cubicle hell, like what I did. They want to know how to scale their business. They want to know how they can land a segment on TV. They are not coming to talk about unforgiveness and bitterness, but I knew that I knew that I knew, and I knew it in my knower, that God had thrown down the gauntlet, and this was to be my topic, and my job was just to be obedient. As I walked out of the spotlight the first day of the conference, I told 600 women about God talking to me. Ooh, it's going to make me cry. Give me a second. Wow. Wowza. That feeling just comes back like that. Okay, I'm good. Jen, you're good. I told 600 women about how God talked to me that day in my SUV on the way to Target. I shared with them how I've been free from that bitterness and unforgiveness with the girl that I was in the friendship with ever since. And not just that, but I told them, and now I'm telling you here on YouTube and on the podcast, I told them how my life and my business literally exploded in a good way after I traded those hurts and those wounds from being stuck and the loss of that friendship. I traded it for God's healing and his wholeness. Not sure why I'm crying. I don't know. I don't know why I'm crying. I shared with those 600 women how I had to give up my idea about being right, about how that relationship or the breakup of that relationship should have looked. I had to give up my feelings about the other person and all the feelings I had about whether I could have handled it better and whether she could have handled it better. I had to decide if my future was worth clinging to my story of hurt and loss any longer, or would I trade that? Would I do a holy exchange with God? Would I trade God my 3-year-old story of she hurt me so bad for his better story that he had for me? I told my conference attendees that I was starting this business conference, asking them to do the same holy exchange that God had asked me to do. That if they had something or someone in their lives that they needed to forgive or let go of, I invited them to write it down on a piece of paper and bring it to the front of the church. Yes, my business conference was at a church, by the way, and leave it at the altar. Now, listen, I had no idea how to do this like correctly. You got to remember that I am not a pastor. I am not a speaker. I talk about I talk about big 80s hair and I coach women on how to grow their social media lists, for goodness sakes. I don't teach people how to forgive people. There was no light show going off during this session. There was no emotional music. There was no smoke rolling from the stage, just a group of amazing women having an intimate moment with the God of the universe. And I knew that some of their stuff was literally too heavy for them to continue to carry. I have to ask the Lord when we're done here, why am I crying? I don't know. I think because I remember like how emotional of a time this was for all of us. By the way, I'm over halfway done with the chapter. It was just emotional that day. It was really good. And when I think back to those days when I did that conference, I kind of feel like a badass. I kind of remember that. And I'm like, dang, Jen, you did have a conference for 600 women. And no, I have not had a live event since then. And no, I don't want to. At least that's what I keep telling myself. No, I haven't wrote another book since Fear is Not the Boss of You. I told myself I wasn't sure that I wanted to do that either. And yet I've kind of been feeling the itch to write again recently. I don't know. God's going to have to make it super obvious. I'm literally going to have a phone call from my agent. Let me keep reading here. What happened next at the conference was one of the most powerful moments of the entire conference. I was undone. I think that's why I'm crying, because I do remember that. Woman after woman after woman came to the front and threw their crumpled up papers full of tear-stained words into a not so fancy trash can. My team estimated that over 80% of the women in the room came forward. I saw women be set free from things that they had been tethered to spiritually for decades. Chains were broken and lives were changed. And it wasn't because I said something great, by the way. My job was just to be obedient to what God was asking me to do. And but I couldn't do that until I was obedient to God in the car that day on the way to Target, you know? Somebody's hearing this and you're feeling equally as triggered as I am right now. I'm being triggered in a good way because you know that there's a situation that you have got to let go of. About to blow my nose. This is not going to be sexy. One moment. I wish that I could cry like Demi Moore on Ghost, but I don't. And I've had a sinus infection, so there's that. All right. It's hard to see also when you've been crying. Unforgiveness is something that all of us drag around at some point in our lives. It's like an extra 10 pounds that I'm carrying on me right now. That's funny. I was carrying 10 extra pounds then. I've got 15 now. Even though it's uncomfortable, we get used to it. And I can see now that my practical tips about building an email list were not going to matter if the women were still nursing deep, heavy, unforgiving stories in their mind. No amount of social media strategy was going to make up for a bitter heart. This is what I'm talking about, ladies, when I'm saying the two are so connected. If at the end of the weekend, a woman went home to a spouse she had not forgiven, or if she was still angry because of the business partner who did her wrong, or this is a big one, if she hadn't forgiven herself for making boneheaded decisions that cost her emotionally and financially, if that woman was still being affected by those things, then nothing else that she heard that weekend at my conference would matter at all. I couldn't give those women strategy and not also offer them God's freedom. So, girl, if you're feeling stuck, and if you have any amount of unforgiveness or bitterness in your heart, nothing I've said in this book going forward is going to matter either. I'm going to tell you what God told me on the way to Target. Friend, He has so much for you if you will just let that thing go. Now, I know some of you are sitting there thinking, I don't have anyone to forgive. I'm not mad at anybody specifically. I've forgiven all the people that have done me wrong, and that's great. Thank the Lord and hallelujah. You are the minority, and I'm proud of you. But before you give yourself a hall pass, take a little deeper look. Perhaps you have forgiven, but are you still bitter? The definition of bitterness is this: anger and disappointment at being treated unfairly. Ooh, is there anywhere in your life where you feel like you were treated unfairly and it still burns your butter to think about it? Is there any topic that when it comes up gives you that sinking feeling in the pit of your belly? Or when you see certain people or certain things on social media, do you instantly feel triggered? Do you roll your eyes and feel a little hot all over at the very mention of someone's name? And I think most of us would say yes to that, but we don't think of that as bitterness. And we certainly don't think of ourselves as bitter people. Am I right? Am I right? I mean, I wouldn't have considered myself a bitter person, and yet here are some ways that you know if you are bitter. Okay, and I only have like 4 pages left here. Number 1, are you often jealous of the people around you who have what you don't? Are you easily irritated by happy people who seem to have it all? Do you criticize or gossip about people when they're not around? Does it seem like a person or a group is out to take things away from you? Is it hard for you to trust friends and family who try to treat you well? That I do that. Like, I always wonder, is there an ulterior motive? What's happening here? Do you have trouble giving other people the benefit of the doubt when their words or their actions are awkward? Do you have a difficult time apologizing when you're wrong or congratulating and praising others when they do well? Are you pessimistic about good news or new opportunities, always looking for the catch? That, my friend, is bitterness. And it's smoldering like a campfire that you tried to put out the night before, but you wake up to discover the thing is still smoking, and that is scary. Bitterness is why you look at social media and you wish that there was an eye rolling emoji. I mean, I know I wrote this 4 years ago, but I still believe this. I still think we need an eye rolling emoji. Bitterness is why you look at someone and obsess about how they are successful or thin or wealthy or happy, and you are not. Bitterness is what's making you cynical. Bitterness is what's making you resent whole groups of people. Let me give you another example. Back when I owned a decorative painting company and did a lot of work in huge, gorgeous, expensive homes, there would be times a few of the women who worked for me would say things about the obviously wealthy homeowners. They would say things like, must be nice, to have a swimming pool or a massage room or a hidden butler's pantry or whatever. Or they would grumble things like, easy for them to say stuff like that because they have ... There were some girls on my team who were bitter towards people in general who had more money than what they had. And that bitterness was poisoning them to the very thing that they were hoping to have or to be one day. Okay, somebody has got to hear this. Listen to me. Truth, you cannot resent or be bitter towards wealthy people and simultaneously hope and pray that God's going to explode your business or explode your life and you be wealthy one day. It doesn't work that way. Jason and I know someone who has been bitter for as long as we've known him. This person had a super traumatic childhood, marked by tragedy, tragedy, and he's become the poster child for bitterness. He's negative in every single conversation you have with him. He never has a nice thing to say. He never has any joy in his life. When we ask him about his job, he complains. When we ask him about his kids, he's grumbling. When we ask him about his wife, he has a cynical, sarcastic answer. You know people like this. We all do. And you probably run from them in the grocery store, right? Because conversations with bitter people are no fun. And maybe you're thinking right now, well, I'm not that bad. I have joy. I'm fun to be around. But I want you to dig deeper on the question, because even though it doesn't seem that bad, bitterness is nothing to mess around with. I've had to work really hard to get rid of all kinds of unforgiveness and bitterness in my life. I only told you about one story about someone I needed to forgive, but there are plenty of others. In the words of my friend Hillary, I could tell you stories about my life, quotation marks, that would light your hair on fire. End of quotation marks. Hashtag, that's for another book. I have to check my heart continually. And if you're serious about getting unstuck and doing big things on this side of heaven, you're going to need to check your heart continually too. You only have so much headspace, my friend. No, really. You can only hold so much in your brain, and unforgiveness and bitterness take up way too much space. They expand like frozen bread dough. There is zero space like left in your head and your soul for anything but that. Unforgiveness and bitterness are keeping you stuck. They're holding you back from what God wants to give you. And friend, there's one more thing. This need for forgiveness also means that some of you need to forgive yourselves. You may have done a brilliant job forgiving others who have wronged you, and you're feeling pretty good about yourself right now. But if we sat down and talked about your life, I wonder if you are clinging to a lot of blame and unforgiveness and shame towards yourself. Maybe you made a horrible decision when you were young. Maybe you cheated, you left your family, you lied, you were addicted to something, you put your family and friends through living hell. Whatever it is, like, where is the line? At what point have you put yourself through enough condemnation? At what point have you punished yourself long enough? When is enough enough? My list of like boneheaded, knuckleheaded choices that could have ruined my life or left me dead in a ditch or longer than a CVS pharmacy receipt. Ooh, that's funny. Jen, you're still funny. I just need to tell myself I am still funny. I'm repositioning here in my chair as I'm reading. And again, almost done. 1.5 pages left. And those CVS pharmacy receipts are long. Like, how I'm even alive in my kitchen writing this book to you is nothing short of God's grace on my life. And I literally mean that. Friends, I come from a sketch background. And there are more times than I can count when I should not have lived through different experiences, or I made choices that should have made my life go in a completely different direction than what it currently sits in. The book continues, but I'm not the sum of the bad decisions that I've made, and you aren't either. I'm not the same person that I was when I made those bad decisions, and you aren't either, even if those decisions were just yesterday. If you've asked God to forgive you for the things that hurt him or hurt others or hurt yourself, it's already done. So if God forgives you, and as a Christian, we're called to be more like Christ, why are you not forgiving yourself? Listen, you've done your penance. Let yourself off the hook. Let go of the pride that makes you believe that your mistakes are too big to be forgivable. Now that you know better, you get to do better, and it's time to move on. So I don't know what that thing is for you, but you do. And you can't take it forward with you anymore. It's affecting your life, your business, your family, and your children. It's keeping you stuck. It's quicksand on your future. You may not see it now, but you can't cling to the old things and expect new fruit. That's a good line, Jen. Nice work. Forgiveness doesn't mean that things that happen to you are okay. Letting go of bitterness doesn't make a situation less unfair, but it's over. What do you need to let go of? Who do you need to forgive? Where can you free up space in order to be able to receive God's very best for you? I promise you, it is possible to quit obsessing over that situation. It is possible to quit thinking about it. It is possible to get past it. It's possible to get back to life as normal, but it's going to require that you let go of your right to be right. That is so good. It's going to require you let go of your hurt. It's going to require you let go of the what ifs of your vain imagination. Because the truth is, what's done is done. It's time to pull up your big girl panties and decide once and for all to move past it. Because you do have work to do. Your kids need a healed mother. Ooh, that is so good. My pastor once said, a root of bitterness is the worst thing that you can leave your children. Oh, ouch. that is tweetable. Now I would have to say that's Xable. Your spouse deserves for you to be whole, not obsessed with something that cannot serve you any longer and takes mental attention away from him and from your family. You deserve to get your headspace back so that you can focus on what is important. God is literally offering you a holy exchange, your pain for his plan. So forgive your parents. It's keeping you stuck. Forgive your ex-husband. It's keeping you stuck. Forgive the contractor who cheated you out of that money. It's keeping you stuck. Forgive that group of women who were mean to you on social media. It's keeping you stuck. Let go of the bitterness over what you currently don't have. Let go of the bitterness over what was taken from you. Let go of the bitterness over what isn't fair in life. Take your whatever that thing is, in quotation marks, write it down, crumple up the paper, and put it in a trash can. Literally burn it if you have to. Send it away with a carrier pigeon if you have one. I don't care what you do with it, but get rid of it. It's the only way for you to be free and get the life that is rightfully yours. My friend, up until now in this book, I hope you have felt me hugging you through the pages. I hope you have felt seen and validated. I hope you had tears in your eyes because you had a revelation of why you behave the way that you do. If you don't want to get unstuck, if you don't want to get rid of being overwhelmed, or if you aren't ready to do things afraid, you have my permission to pause here and put the book down until a later date when you are ready. Because we're going to get knee deep in the next chapter, and this one's going to hurt a little. I'm still hugging you, but in the next chapter, I'm also going to start giving you a little butt kicking along the way. That's because I know that my affirming you is not going to be the thing that changes your life. Only when you get a holy conviction of why you gotta stand up for your life will. I'm ridiculously excited because freedom starts with this next section, sis. Don't leave me now. And then I start section 3 of the book. Ooh, and it's good. Starts with a quote from Ed Milet. So that was kind of long, friends. Who was that for today? I do think that was a refresher for myself. I had some epiphanies when I was reading that. I'm really proud of the decisions that I made and how I decided in that vehicle that day on the way to Target to get past that situation. And it really does just take you deciding. Like the Bible says that we're to take down every thought and hold it captive. You really are in control of your thought life. And it really boils down to how are you reframing every single thought you have? Are you going to continue thinking of yourself as the victim, or can you reframe it? Because each of us have situations in our life that we can continue to cling to and talk about and relive and stroke that, stroke that thing. Because we stroke our stories, friends. We treat our stories like a stuffed animal, and they're like our whoobies sometimes, and we're patting it and, burping it and everything else. And for some of you, you've got to change, you've got to reframe it. Because if instead you would look at that story and be like, hey, because I know for me, I would not be the person I am sitting in this chair today if I had not gone through all the crap that I have. Do I wish that everything could be different? I mean, yeah, I wish a lot of my past was different. I know there are some people that it's like, nope, because I'm where I am today because of what I went through. No, there are still parts of my past, of my upbringing, of my childhood, of parts of my life that I still pay the consequences for today. There are parts of my life that are still very sad to me. There are still some gaps in my life that, Jesus fills, but that I wish looked different. And so do I wish that I have always made different decisions or other people around me had made different decisions? Sometimes, yeah. But like we can't go back and change anything. And so I'm really proud of the way that I have learned how to reframe things in my brain so that I don't feel like I'm looking at things from a victim standpoint, but that I'm looking at things from a more powerful position. And for some of you, it's really time that you do that as well. It doesn't mean that the things that have happened to you are okay, but it does mean that you're ready to stop using them as the excuse as to why today can't be different for you. So I don't know who this is for, but if you're watching on YouTube and this was beneficial to you at all, you got anything out of it, would you just leave some sort of a comment below? Let me know what spoke to you. If you are listening on the podcast app, I guarantee you have a person or two that you think to yourself, man, they need to hear this message. Would you just forward this podcast episode to a friend or two? I always appreciate it so much when people DM me and they're like, I just found you through my friend so-and-so. And I'm like, oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing my podcast. And so I appreciate you so much. I hope that was beneficial. You can go to Amazon. You can get Fear is Not the Boss of You. You can have it delivered to your doorstep in just a matter of days. Remember, there is no paperback version, so I wish that Amazon would quit saying that. Get the hardcover. I love you so, so much, friends. I hope you're having a good one. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye. Easton, why couldn't the screen be bigger so that when I blew my nose, I tried to lean out of it? Well, that just made it even more uncomfortable. Now I'm just like looking like I'm throwing up, leaned over, blowing my nose. I mean,